Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Tonight is going to be a little bit of a random grab bag. I've been on vacation this week. And by vacation, I mean I've been off of work and at home with the family doing house chores. So, vacation-ish. Staycation, we'll call it. Unfortunately, that also meant that I didn't really prep a ton of stuff. But there has been a little bit of action in the XAML test. I've been hoping to do a lot more coding, but my plans this week got completely upended. So thank you, Justin Bieber. So everything that I had planned to do this week, I think one thing that I had planned has actually happened, and everything else has just been utter chaos. So today I found myself assembling a bed for my son. Didn't plan that when I got up this morning, but apparently that's what we're doing today. So, but I did want to jump back into my XAMLTest library. So for those people who may not have seen it before, it's a library I put together specifically for writing UI tests for the material design library. Because when you are writing a theme or a styling library for WPF, it is very difficult to write unit tests or tests in general. Because how do you test, does it look right? I mean, that just doesn't, it's not really a thing that most tests lend themselves well to. So I built a simple testing thing. Most UI tests with WPF usually go one of two ways. You use one of the UI testing libraries, which goes through the accessibility APIs, which are fine for simulating user input and fine for testing apps. Not so great for testing individual styles or individual bits. Usually my favorite example is telling people, yeah, validate that the background is red. Like, that's just something the APIs don't give you access to, which makes it really, really hard. Whereas XAMLTest, what it does is it actually starts up an empty WPF shell, lets you put arbitrary content inside of it, and then interact with that shell going against like the visual tree so that you can pull out individual elements, check properties, all that kind of jazz. So it lends itself really well to testing styles and themes. And I thought I would go over some of the stuff that I did in the last couple days. So, boom, let me do that. Turn my dial so I don't annoy myself with my own talking. Okay, so ignore everything aside from this colorful Christmas tree looking list of pipelines where it's red, green, green, red, green, green, red. And this has been going on for a while. And specifically what has been going on is I've been running into issues like this. So I open up the build and all of a sudden I get an error like this. Unable to read data from transport connection. Existing connection was forcibly closed by the remote host. And if you start looking at the stack trace, you'll note none of this is my code. Like specifically Microsoft Visual Studio Test Platform. It's like, what the heck? What the heck? And it took me a little while, but I think I figured out what's been going on. So, couple things to show off first. So, let me, yeah. So, we're gonna open this guy up real quick and open XAMLTest up. I still want to come back. The WinUI port that I've been doing for XAMLTest, I kind of put on hold. There's a few limitations with WinUI's API that I ran into, and I don't currently know a resolution. So that's exciting. And I think what I just need to do is make XAMLTest a little more platform agnostic. It was written with WPF in mind, and so some of its APIs are very WPF-y. So I might need to change it. Okay, back to this. So pipeline thing. Okay. With .NET, I think this came with .NET 5. Don't quote me on this. The .NET test command comes with some cool extra stuff on it. Specifically, if you are running your tests, oftentimes if you have a test that will crash the test runner, like throws an out of memory exception or throws a Stack Overflow, something that is not easily trappable, and it just brings down the entire test runner, it's not always obvious which test did that. Especially if you are running a bunch of tests in parallel, it can feel very random as far as when it occurs. So they added in this blame crash, which when it fires up the .NET test process, what it does is it intentionally tries to keep track of what is running. And so if your test host actually crashes, it'll tell you, hey, this is the test that was running. You probably want to look here first. It may not always be overly helpful, but at least it's useful. The other one that it has is blame hang. Because sometimes you can imagine if you have a unit test that just gets into an infinite loop, typically how that manifests for people is on their pipelines, what they'll see is like GitHub Actions will automatically kill you after 60 minutes of execution. So unless you've done something, by default, you get 60 minutes to do all your stuff, and then you get terminated. And so what will often happen is you'll hit your 60 minutes, you get terminated. It's like, what happened? Well, in my case, what I did is I'm like, okay, my tests take about 2-ish minutes to run. So I set a timeout of 5 minutes, double what I expect, right? So you should always pick a timeout that's high enough that if that time is reached, it's pretty, you're very confident that, yeah, something's gone awry, this is bad, right? You never want to pick a timeout that's low, but my tests consistently run between like 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So it's like, okay, maybe if I add 300 tests or something, I'll have to bump that up. But for now, this is double what I expect. If I hit 5 minutes, I know there's a problem. And what I noticed is inside of all of these, you'll note that this test one was able to run for 6 minutes. Now, that probably indicates that a bunch of tests ran, but then one test hit that 5-minute timeout. So you can imagine, it was running for 60-ish seconds, and then all of a sudden it hits bad test, and bad test kicks it up, it hits that 5 minutes, and it causes the termination. And that's what's actually giving this exception of unable to read from transport connection, because that blame hang is saying, been running too long, die. And so it's forcibly terminating, which is fine. That's what I told it to do. It's unfortunately not always useful here. The nice part, though, is it does tell me, hey, here's the test that was running. Now, if we go back through a bunch of the previous builds, you'll note that this name is never consistent. It's basically random. And I was like, this is really frustrating. I have basically something in XAML, and I could kind of guess a little bit of what APIs it, like there's the starting of the remote process and shutting down the remote process, and those are the things that are common to all the tests. And since this was pretty much random and could be any test, I'm like, it's probably in either the startup or the shutdown. But that's not real specific. It's like, I've got a potential like timing or a hang issue, and I don't know what's going on, and I have no idea why I'm just arbitrarily hanging and dying. So, solution. So when this thing crashes and times out, you will note that it where does it show it? Somewhere in here it shows that it created a dump file, and I don't see it. So DMP. There we are. So you'll note it created this little dump file to say, hey, when we hung, let me write out a dump file so that you can get it. And I'm like, that's great. The next trick, though, is because this was only, as is always the case, this only occurs on the pipeline. I could never get this to occur locally, which was really, really, really frustrating. No matter how many times I ran on any of my machines, it never reproduced. However, about 1 in 3 on the pipeline, it would happen. And, sorry. I think I have fixed it, by the way. This build, you'll note I'm up to the 4th execution, and they're all success so far. I'm just running it a bunch of times to prove to myself that, yes, I have, in fact, fixed the problem. We'll get to there. We'll get to that in a moment. So I'm just going to keep kicking this every time I see it finish. Just kick it, half a dozen times to prove to myself that, yes, it is fixed. So in order to get these dump files, what I did is I added another step to my GitHub action. And the key part here is to set the if condition to always. Because the default behavior on each step in a GitHub action is to only run if the previous one was success. which in general is exactly what you want, right? Like if .NET build fails, I don't want .NET Test trying to run. It's pointless. The build failed. We aren't testing. That's not a thing, right? So in general, that's exactly what you want. Works fine. Great. So I had to set always to make sure that this would run, because if .NET Test failed, I still wanted to go after those dump files regardless. So if we get all the way down to here, it blindly goes hunting for any dump files underneath my test results folder. Just, I don't care, go get them, right? I've done the same thing with my screenshots because this library, if a test fails for any reason, it'll actually take a screenshot of the app so you can see its current state and upload them there. Oh, it's interesting that this is in .NET Core. Huh, I should actually change this. We're gonna fix that too while we're in here. Because that's a bug, because that's only picking it up on one of the configurations, not all of them. Huh, interesting. I never noticed that I made that mistake. See, and it is worth noting that you do need to be, if you're using the upload artifact step, you do need to be on v3 to pick up some of this fancier wildcard pattern match. So, rev to v3 if you haven't already done so. That is one thing. If anybody has a good solution, I would love to hear it. There's Dependabot, which is great for making sure that your NuGet packages stay up to date for your dependencies. But I have yet to find something that will notify me or let me run a scan or anything to tell me if my GitHub Actions have an updated release. I would love to know that. I was halfway tempted to build something. Maybe I'll come around to it. That's one of those ideas in the back of my head that may come back. So, that's not where we're going. We're going back to here. So I went through and I'm like, okay, let's upload this dump file. So if we come back here to the summary, you'll see that I've got these crash dumps. And I preemptively downloaded it. Huzzah. And if you download the zip file, inside of it, you'll find this lovely large GUID because it makes them unique. And then this guy here, let's see, I don't have it open. If you just double click on the dump file, it'll open in Visual Studio. Probably. Assuming you haven't changed defaults for file extensions. Typically dump files open in Visual Studio. And you get something like this. And usually this is the point where people look at it and go, right, what do I do now? Okay, step one, you take your Solution Explorer and put it on the left so that you don't seem like one of the crazy people with it on the right. I do not know this. Weird defaults. Okay, besides that, I just installed an update recently, so I'm guessing it mucked with my default settings. So you fire this up. It comes with a bunch of information, system version, which is fine. Like this is the operating system of the build agent that it ran on. It's like, okay, ran as an x64, yada, yada, yada. It does list all of the modules that are loaded. Think of modules as referenced assemblies. So things that were loaded up as part of this. And most of this is not real surprising. If we sort reverse alphabetical, you'll note that, oh, not surprising. It had my unit test project loaded. And that unit test project references the main project, who would have thunk, and a test app. Okay, great. So it had all my DLLs loaded. You can see the path that it was loaded in right there. You can scroll through all these. It's a bunch of the stuff that you would kind of expect. A bunch of the .NET Framework assemblies were loaded. All of this stuff. It's like, okay, that's fine. That's all well and good. That kind of makes sense. But I want to actually see why I was hanging. So over in this action section, and I apologize, with my increased fonts, it doesn't let me change the size of this, which is really bothering me. I'm really tempted to just go change it real quick. Whatever. Horizontal scroll bar. You can see there's different debug options. And so you can run diagnostic, debug, manage memory, symbol paths. But what we're interested in this case, because I wrote a managed application, this is a C# library. I don't care about mixed or native. I'm only interested in the managed stuff. So we're just going to hit debug with managed. And we're going to let this guy fire up. Sure. Dependability. Let's see. I haven't tested this yet. Was going through dependability documentation and saw that you can choose a GitHub action for your package manager. Might do what you haven't gotten around to testing this yourself. Oh. So Dependabot now supports it. Oh. Oh. This is perfect. This is perfect. We may go turn this on because I don't think I have this on yet. Dependabot is usually what you turn on to go through and do. It'll automatically open these PRs to bump your NuGet package validations as they go through, which is great because typically that's what you want. But apparently it'll also do your actions now too. Sweet. We may go turn on Dependabot. Oh, uh-oh. Okay, so hang on. Take it with a grain of salt. This thing just crashed now too. Ooh. This is a different failure. This is different than the other failures, but I might have another one because this looks like a different failure to check. Again, it took me 4 tries to get it to fail. I'm getting sick. I'm basically on a mission right now because I got annoyed to hunt out all of my timing issues. Okay. So we're going to do all this. I'm going to cancel. I don't care to load any of this stuff. Decompile source code. Sure. Show me where we were at. So you'll note this thing is loading up symbols for test host.dll. This is not my process, right? You'll note here we are inside of Microsoft Visual Studio Test platform. I told it, hey, just show me the decompiled stuff. And so this is great, but again, this isn't my code. This isn't overly helpful. But now that we are inside of here, do you want to stop debugging? No, leave that. Oh, I gotta leave that tab open. We can actually start using our regular debugging tools just as if we were stopped at a breakpoint, which is perfect. Like that's what these dump files are, is at the point the problem occurs, it I don't want to say writes out all the information your debugger would have, but conceptually that's kind of what you're getting. Okay, so we're going to go debug Windows and let's start with threads. So we can come in here, we can see, okay, we were on the main thread that we were on was sitting at this monitor wait, which isn't exactly uncommon. Inside of C# and .NET, monitors are the underlying class that backs like the lock keyword. And it's also the most common thing that will end up backing any sort of blocking call. So a lot of times like the task.wait stuff will also end up deep down in there using monitor waits, and wait handles will end up using them. So you'll see here that all of these threads, we can kind of take a look at each of these and you can click around to jump to the different ones if you are interested in seeing them. But what we're now interested in is, okay, hang on, let's take a look at the call stack because ultimately we kind of want to know where we're at and how we got there. And you'll note here, this thing comments in the call stack, waiting on async operations. So we can actually go to the async call stack. So you can get to it either debug Windows, is it parallel stacks? I think this is what gets it to me. That isn't quite where I was going. We can double click here. Oh yeah, parallel stacks. That's where we're going. Okay, go into the big window. And we can come in here. And now we get something a little bit more interesting. Because we can see all the way down here, this is all of the test execution stuff, right? We go through MS test, text execution manager, run test, execute test in source, run single test method runner execute. I mean, just from the names, we can kind of infer that, okay, this was the method that's going to be iterating over all the tests. This is going to run the individual tests. This executes it. And we start working all the way up. And now we get into something that resembles my code, which is perfect. This is what we were looking for. So we can see, okay, browse and find XAML test. Oh, I should have uploaded my PDB to download with this because that would have been helpful too, because then I could have jumped straight to my source to take a look at it. But I can come into here and I can look immediately and go, oh, okay, I can see what happened. This test here can generate type element, and actually we can, okay, well let me make it big. Why will you not let me just copy you? Okay, fine. Come back over here. Can generate type element from custom control in XAML, I think is the one that it is. Shut up. Nope, the one in remote app. Good news, they're right next to each other. So this is the test here that ended up causing the problem. And you'll note that the next step in here is managed app dispose async, which it's not immediately apparent from looking at this code unless you've played around in XAML Test to know where that's coming from. But this app instance right here, this IApp, under the hood, the implementing class is that managed app. Now, that class is internal and kind of hidden from you, but we can see, okay, with managed app dispose async, which makes sense, we're in a dispose async, so we're immediately looking for an await using, which in this case, there's only one await using. So somewhere around this closing curly brace, this guy gets cleaned up, and he's using the async dispose. And then we have this app dispose async. So let's go to app.dispose async. Sure. Well, we can start at managed app. So we can see managed app dispose async just calls dispose async and then kill process. So this thing's gonna just sit here and go boom and then nuke the process. This dispose async down underneath this guy, and ignore this because this wasn't here a minute ago. This was Kevin implementing a fix. It was calling this client shutdown async, and then it was hanging. Now, recall that I said that XAMLTest fires up a shell of a WPF app. That's a remote process. So this client shutdown async is making a call to that remote process to say terminate. And I think, again, because I occasionally do that every so often. If we come over here, and I'm just going to skip all the stuff and jump straight to the shutdown, and let me actually stash. Let me back reset hard. Let me just back up to what the code was when I got here, before I got to it. So inside of this shutdown method, so this is now inside of the remote WPF shell that's running. This guy was calling application dispatcher invoke async and calling shutdown. So my theory is that what was happening is this was able to execute fast enough that it was able to finish terminating the remote process before it was able to send back the reply over gRPC. That's my theory, because this didn't happen very often. Again, I've got like 600 something tests, and most of the time they all ran flawlessly. Most of the time that reply gets back, and then the app shuts down. But my theory is that this thing was shutting down, and gRPC was sitting there waiting for the name pipe to send a reply and never getting it, and it would hang forever. So, jump back forward. So I went, okay, with that as a working theory, how would we end up fixing this? Oh, hush now, hush now. So I went through and I'm like, okay, if it were me, what we're going to do is we're basically going to straight up always send the reply. Now, I've got a remote logger that I built up so that this remote process can write to a file and we can get that information back. Most of the time, the logs are sent back via gRPC. However, there are cases where if that communication pipe can't be established, the logs die. And I was tired of the logs dying in that situation, like if there was a failure to start for some reason. And so I had it start writing to a file. That way it could always write. And then the other side can just pick the file up on the return side. So that's all this is, close down your handle to any files that you may have open to. So just shut them down. And then more importantly, we're just going to wait a little bit. Just a little bit. Is half a second long enough? No idea. No idea. Should this be configurable? Maybe. I don't know. But I was like, you know what? Let's go through. Let's set this thing for a delay, and then we'll go ahead and call shutdown. Just because ultimately we want it to shut down, but we don't actually care how quickly it shuts down. Probably most of the time, ish. And actually, I'm now realizing, now that I explained my code, that I may have introduced a subtle bug with this, because this thing attempts to shut down with a particular exit code. Anyway, what I also did is I'm like, you know what? Let's not let gRPC wait forever either. Because before, this guy looked like this. And typically, if the name pipe gets disposed of, you get some sort of, host disconnected or similar type thing that bubbles at you. I was like, but in this case, it seemed like the client was just hanging forever. And I'm like, okay, let's go through. This is an async call. It takes a cancellation token. Let's set it up to say, you know what? We're going to give you 1 second to shut down. 1 second. Let that thing finish shutting down all the way. And after it's shut down, and this is where I think there's a bug. So I'm also just straight up ignoring cancellation exceptions. So in the event that it takes more than a second, so for whatever reason, something happens on the other side, it takes more than a second, this guy's going to stop, throw the operation canceled exception. This will go through, do the remote, read the remote log file, write it to the logs on the test host side. But then I am realizing that also means this guy's going to immediately come in and kill the process. Actually, I guess this thing will give the process 10 seconds. So there is no bug. We're good. It's going to give it 10 seconds. And if it doesn't shut down in 10 seconds, it's just going to murder the process. Straight up kill. Wait for exit. Let's change this to time span from seconds 1. I just like reading time span rather than having to convert from milliseconds. Oh, do you not support? Oh, you don't support a time span. Oh, that's mean. Okay, we're going to do that then. At least put an underscore in there so I don't have to try to count my zeros. So, and that's where I was at. And I was pretty proud of myself when I ran it twice and I didn't run into the issue. Because the other night, it didn't seem to matter how many times I ran it. Fail, fail, fail. I was getting really annoyed. Really annoyed. Okay, stop debugging. Yes, stop debugging. Because that was debugging from the hex dump. Now, let's go back here. I would like to pop all my stuff. Yeah, pop stash. What is your problem? 2 conflicts prevent. I don't know. What is in the stash that's going to prevent few changes? Oh, the stash has already been popped. Oh, delete stash. Okay, great. Okay. So, given that though, we also have this new failure here. So this is onset property can set color. So let's just immediately jump here. Like I said, I am on a quest to kill all these errors. Okay. So this is a very simple test. It attempts to set the content to a grid. Oh, and this is actually something I can do a lot cleaner now. So there's a nice overload that lets me do that. And now I don't need to. I can make all my code a little bit shorter and save, because each of these calls is making a gRPC call from my unit test process, the test host, to my WPF shell and back. So each of these asynchronous calls, they're asynchronous for a reason, because they aren't cheap. And these tests, like UI tests, are relatively slow compared to regular unit tests. Like, noticeably slow. These things can easily take several hundred milliseconds a piece, which doesn't sound like a lot until you have 600 things that take potentially a few hundred milliseconds. So cutting out the number of calls is a huge performance improvement. The other thing that is a major performance improvement with XAMLTest is the fewer times you have to spin up that WPF shell the better. So the fewer calls to start remote will save you a lot of time. Because spinning a process up is very heavy and very time intensive. Like, that is not a cheap thing to do. Now, with that said, occasionally, depending on what test you're writing, you may want a fresh shell. Like, you go through a muck with a bunch of application resources, or you're maybe mutating something that's static on the other side or whatever. Fine, yes, that's a good reason why you might want to just dump the whole shell and start over fresh. But generally, if you've got a bunch of tests that can theoretically just replace content and rerun their tests, this is a huge time savings. I'm tempted to fix more of these things here, because these things are, because I could clean up a lot of these tests. Visual element, and this is actually a visual element of type grid. I don't know where I was. There. And because we don't care about this anymore, I can get rid of this. So the set XAML content method will just automatically give you back whatever the root element was. So all of this stuff that was previously always retrieving by name is not necessary anymore, which just makes everything a little bit nice. Okay. I forgot where I was going. We were fixing a test. That one. Boom. Okay. Can set color. Sorry, can't resist. I see it and I have to fix it. Low tolerance for WAT. And then you need grid, and then you don't need any of this stuff. Boom. You know, I almost could do an overload for this that just automatically populated it from here. Boy, that's really tempting. Nah. Not right now. Yagni. Okay, so back to the call stack. So this guy here was running, and the important thing to note is, even though in WPF brushes are very much UI objects. This is one of the reasons why in a lot of cases I really don't like I'll make exceptions at times, but I really don't like them in my view models. Because what ends up happening is, because things like solid color brush, things like get color, you'll note this ends up calling back into the dispatcher to make sure that it's being invoked on the thread that owns the brush, i.e. the UI thread. And so the moment you put a brush inside of your view model, you run into this problem where it's like, now my view model has to have a concept of the UI thread. And it really shouldn't care. It really shouldn't. So in this case, where were we? Set back. So let's see, where are we? We came in on visual element test line 155. That line number is now meaningless. This extension method generates the set method, and then set background color. Oh, interesting. So it is actually the set background color method that's biting me. So this method here. So this guy here. Okay, so this is generated code inside that gets built up, because I did not like having to keep all of these things around. Jump back to here real quick. I figured if I know the type of element, in this case grid, I can automatically generate all of the helper methods for all of its dependency properties. XAMLTest under the hood, the base visual element, doesn't actually have much to it. Well, I should be careful how I say that. What it has is set property. Now, this is obnoxious to have to specify every time, which is why I wrote a generator to generate all of the obvious ones. Because if I know that the type is a grid, I know all your properties. So I just generate helper methods for all of them, which is all this is. And for properties that are of type brush, I gen a color overload as well. So there's set background, which takes a brush, and set background color, which takes a color for the brush. Now, what I'm noticing though, so this is in a getter. So inside of here, line 16, there's a call to brush.color. So get underscore. If you ever see set underscore or get underscore, these are auto-generated methods from auto properties. So when you see these, look for properties. Which is going to be this guy here. Because there's line 16. So this is the brush. After it does the set, XAMLTest sends the value back across. Now, it's worth noting, it sends back a brush, but it's not the same instance as a brush. And this is one of the things with XAMLTest that's important to remember, is the object instances that you're acting on inside of your tests are different instances than the ones that exist inside of the WPF shell. So this guy created a brush, and then when it called color to give back the color object, it went to boom. Because the getter on the color does get value, and then this dispatcher verify access, because a different thread owns it. So how did we get... Oh, it's because it's an asynchronous... Oh. Well, doesn't that just bite? Okay, so I think I know what's going on. Go to implementation. Do you have Mountain Dew today? Yes. The current flavor of the moment is Mountain Dew Voltage. But I also have a Baja Mango in queue. Go to definition. Okay, so here's the set property call. That's going to do the actual setting. And I'm curious. So this guy calls get value as. And gets back this I value. And then this calls get as, which will do the conversion. Go to implementation. Let's see. Property. Just do it. Yeah, so this guy here, all of these checks are just around visual elements, and in this case we're talking about brushes, so that isn't going to be us. And otherwise, this is what ends up happening, is it calls into this serializer class, and I have built out a bunch of serializers for the WPF types, but I left this somewhat open-ended, so that if somebody else wanted to build their own serializer for some custom type they want to send back and forth, that's fine. Because at the end of the day, most of the time, I'm just sending strings on the wire. It could be more efficient. I wasn't interested in making it efficient. Side question. Is your background music a particular playlist? Sort of. It is coming from owned... this guy. So, quick shout out, Own 3D. If people are interested, they make a bunch of streamer stuff from like overlays, emotes, alerts, backgrounds, and they've got music stuff. And their music things, they actually have a Twitch stream with different playlists on there. They have a YouTube stream, etc. I'm trying to remember exactly which one I've got queued up here. I don't remember. It's one of theirs, though. Okay, so my working theory is this. So we came into this brush serializer, which does all of these brushes. And so what I'm pretty sure is happening is when we call into here and do get as, well, but get as is after the await. And this is what, so this I value that comes back basically just contains strings. Get as is what would call into the serializer to create one of these brushes. And in this case, it would have been a solid color brush. It'll deserialize the brush data and then call get brush, which will just new up a new solid color brush. But here's the thing. When you're dealing with async and await, the thread that executes after the await is a little bit arbitrary. Now, in a WPF app, if you do nothing, the code that executes after the await will, how do I phrase this properly? Likely be the same thread that it was before the await. So for frameworks that have an execution context specified, what you will get, there's the method on the end of all of these async calls. Oh, and I probably need to actually jump back to one of these. There's a method on these called continue with. Or, I'm sorry, configure await. I'm mixing up my things. And you'll note that configure await takes in a Boolean called continue on captured context. So if you do nothing, this thing defaults. So not having this on here is the same as having configure await true. And the captured context says, okay, before we shell out and do the queue for the callback and all that jazz, let's go ahead and capture that execution context. That way, after the await, we'll marshal ourselves back onto that same context and keep running. In a UI situation like WPF, that's really handy because that means if you do something that started on the UI thread, you can async, go off, do your stuff, and then everything after the await, you're back on your UI thread so that you can go through and like edit your UI objects, which is usually perfect, right? You queue off to say, you know, go make web service call. Oh, and then when I get back, you know, I'm going to set some text and whatnot on my UI objects. Great, fine. That works wonderful. The problem being is in some cases where you don't have a context, you are not guaranteed. How do I say this properly? Just because you set configure await true, you only go back to that original context if there was one to begin with. So for example, if this method is invoked on a background thread where there is no context, whatever thread's there is no context to capture. So even though you have configure await true, the thing after the await, who knows? It's completely arbitrary. It sucks. There's no guarantee of what thread is actually going to pick that up. So you end up getting bit just a little bit. Just a little bit. And I'm trying to decide the appropriate way to fix this. So option one. I could have this thing be a little bit more intelligent. Well, but that'd be a little hard. I was going to say, rather than having this thing called .color, I could have this thing just kick back a color and just keep it, because color itself is a struct. It's not a UI object. It doesn't care. It just contains some values for the RGB stuff. So we could have it just be color all the way through. But I think what might be cleaner is to actually be smarter about what we do here. Oh, shut up. You won't let me edit there. Solid color brush, SB gets new, right? So I think rather than just blindly calling SB.color, which is what the other one's doing, I think we almost want to... Do you expose... You do have your dispatcher here. I'm wondering if we should be a little more intelligent and do something like safe get color. Like, what I kind of want to write is this code here. SB safe get color. I kind of want to write that line. And then inside of that, what I think I want to do is be because this do you have, I don't know if you're going to give me, what was the call in that call stack where I was doing the check access? Dispatcher, oh, it's verify access. Oh, do you not expose that? That is mean. Get value doesn't expose verify access? Really? Do you have a verify access that you're... No, it's right there. Yeah, and there's a check access. Oh, this is on dispatcher object. So that would mean that I would go here, right? Get value. Why do I not see a... Why do I not see... Okay, what am I missing? Show me. Show me your code. I'm missing something obvious. Oh, don't be like that. Okay, we're going to go here. Because I think that's what I want to write, is a safe get color, and then change my generator to always use that. Let's see, source.net. And then I want something like get value. And then that may be a little too abstract. So I want dependency object get value. Show me your code. I know you're there. Dependency object, presentation framework. Let's see, it's property. Huh? I want to go to that class. Really? You have half the stuff in here, but not dependency object? Boo! Boo, boo, boo. Whatever, we can find our way through here. We can find our way through. Dependency object get value. And then inside of there, there's dispatcher verify access. I think it's just unhappy because of this call. Yeah, see? See, you know it's there, even though you're not showing it to me. Yeah, so despite the fact that my IntelliSense is straight up lying to me, the method's there. Yeah, see? See? I knew you were there. Stop lying to me. How the heck is it hiding from my IntelliSense? Oh. Oh, that's dirty. That's dirty. It's hiding it? Okay, proof that you can invoke things that don't show up in your IntelliSense. Dirty, dirty, dirty. Why did they do that? Usually you do this when it's like, I need this public, but I don't want people to ever invoke this. Which probably means it's exactly right up my alley for something that I want to invoke. Okay, so let's write that method, because I think that's ultimately what we want. Color mixins. This is a... Hey, stop it. Okay, so we've got some helpers here for colors. I don't think I have a brush one already, and this is probably good enough. Yeah, I don't really have a brush one. So public static color save get color. I think that's probably a reasonable name. Retrieves the color off of the solid color brush in a thread safe way. Boom. Okay. Something like that. I don't care. Okay, so step one, we're going to add a null check because I cannot assume, because this is a library that's consumed outside of my stuff, even though I have nullable reference types turned on, I cannot assume that my callers will have nullable reference types turned on. So public APIs should be null checked. Okay, so we're going to do solid color brush dispatcher. I'm trying to remember, can this guy ever return null? I don't see the other drawback. Is it editor state advanced? Okay, I gotta look at what else is on this enum. Always, never, and advanced. I need to find. Okay, so story time, real quick. Story time. If we go, there is. If I can spell my own thing. So if you want to have some fun, for anybody who hasn't seen it, there is annoying me. There's this video here, and then there's also one on IntelliText. This one. Where is it? Videos, MS Build. And I've shared this now a couple times with people because, so that first one is me putting together the talk that I ultimately give here. And I'm sort of thinking that this guy here needs to make it into my Calamities V2. Because I've been putting together yet a longer list of more horrible things you can do with C#. Am I advanced enough to see this property? I think so. I think I'm advanced enough I want to see the never ones. I really want to know how it... I have to believe that this is an enum that probably came into existence long time ago, like when they were first building out the editor for WinForms, which was one of the first really cool WYSIWYG ones. Like, I have to believe this was invented way back then, like early 2000s. And yeah. I think, but it doesn't answer my question of whether this dispatcher can be null. The fact that there is a detach from dispatcher and friend access allowed. Oh boy, we're just gonna find all kinds of things I shouldn't know about. Okay, what the heck is this attribute? This feels like something. Ooh. Oh, what is WYSIWYG? You get. So it's actually WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. But WYSIWYG sounds cooler and is a lot shorter. Okay. Interesting. That attribute is attributed with itself. Oh, yes. Yes. Please show me this. Please show me this. Look at that. Interesting. I highly doubt this is... I highly doubt that this class is respected outside. Huh. Reach frame rate 2. Interesting. UI automation. Okay, I feel dumb now. Don't feel dumb. I use jargon all the time. If all internal is visible is not true for a friend assembly, Huh. Okay, we've now found two things that I'm just going to drag that over to here, and we're going to save that for later. Okay. So, but the fact that we can easily dispatch from the dispatcher, it's like Yagni, so I should have known. Pebcac is my other one that I like to use. Problem exists between chair and keyboard. Okay, so let's null check the dispatcher since there's at least a couple cases. So, yeah, that. You watch your mouth. Sorry. Let's see. So this is going to be easy. Of solid color brush color. Right. So we'll do that. And then we'll go dispatcher invoke solid color brush dot color. Okay. Oh, actually, we should only do this and not dispatcher check access. Let's see. Cannot to system.action. Okay, fine. Convert to a delegate. There you are. Okay, so if we have a dispatcher and we are not on the dispatcher's thread, we will invoke onto it. In all other cases, we'll just straight up access this. This feels like something I need to write some tests for. This feels like something that needs some tests. Okay. Let's see. Test method. Public void safe get color with brush from another thread can access color. Okay. So step one, we need a brush from a different thread. So solid. Oh, this is gonna. Let's go async task because we're gonna be playing this thing on different threads. So brush gets await task.run. Right. New solid color brush, and obviously whenever coming up with a random color, the answer is always fuchsia, because it is the potentially the ugliest color out there that I can think of. Some people might argue for lime. Okay, and then we're gonna go assert are equal. So I expect to be able to get colors fuchsia from brush dot safe get color. Actually, real quick, let's just make sure that this throws. So this test should fail, right? And maybe I should leave that in. Well, this isn't a useful test. This isn't testing any of my code. This is just asserting that WPF is working. We're going to do this first just to make sure that I understand how WPF works. Test Explorer, where are you? You. Here, pin, stay. Ooh. That no bueno. That no bueno. But this was supposed to fail and it didn't. So how do I... let me guess. You probably don't have a dispatcher then? Let's look. Brush. It does have a dispatcher. Interesting. So it must have picked up the same thread. So it's worth noting this dispatcher thread here, you'll note its apartment state is MTA. So multi-threaded apartment. There are two apartment states, MTA and STA. So multi-threaded apartment and single-threaded apartment. Single-threaded apartment is your UI threads. The idea being that only one thing can touch your UI objects. That's what's enforcing it on you. And I'm guessing I must be on the same thread. Because that guy there... Yeah, see, I am on thread 10. And apparently this was done by thread 10. See, here's the problem with tasks. Here's the problem with tasks. Is you don't have any control over what thread you're on. Okay. I hate doing this, but we're going to do it anyway. Because I really need this on a different thread. And even though task.run will probably be a different thread, I've got a video a couple months back on TPL, Task Parallel Library, and tasks and threading. When you do a task.run or task.factory.startNew, all that does is queue this delegate up to be picked up and run by the next available thread. Which means, because things are just being thrown in a queue and random workers are pulling them out and doing work on them, maybe it's the same one, maybe it's a different one, who knows? And apparently this one finished and then just continued going. And that no bueno. I don't remember the parameterized thread start. Is that just object void? Is that the signature of that delegate? No. Where is the... I want your constructor in here. So worth noting, if you're in one of these files and you click and you don't see what you expect over here, it's probably because there's more than one class in the same file. In this case, you'll note it's on thread handle, not on thread. So you can either change it up here in the middle drop down, or you can just move your cursor down and it'll jump for you. So all I want to see is its constructor and the parameterized thread start. I'm sorry, what? The definition of object is hidden. Oh my word. New thread start. Just show me your signature. That's all I want to know. I don't remember what you are. Void empty. Even better. Even better. I think that means I can just do this, or is that going to convert to action? Are you happy with that? Yeah. You can implicitly convert. Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare the brush here. This is going to be a long, bloody way of doing this. We're going to do this. We're going to go brush equals, boom. All right, so assignment, that goes there, that goes there. Okay. I get you. The hush. Yes. Hush. Okay. Then we need to do thread.start and thread.join. Boom. Okay. Normally doing your own threading is a very, very bad idea. Threads are expensive. Doing new thread, this will allocate about 1 megabyte of memory, which is why spinning up your own threads every time you want to do something on a background thread is not efficient. That's why tasks are better, because then they get queued up into a pool of threads Those threads are already allocated for you, managed by the framework. You don't have to think too hard, and everybody's happy. Okay, run test. You should fail. In this case, I want to see red circle. Come on, red circle, come on. Yeah! There we go. Calling thread cannot access because a different thread owns it. Thank goodness. Okay, so now if I do safe get color, this should now work. Let's see. The task was canceled. I'm sorry, what? Oh, so it tried to dispatch or invoke. Oh, it's probably because my thread is dead. Oh, no, that's an interesting problem. If a thread allocates the brush and then is killed, huh? Oh, that's actually a good point, Justin Bieber. That is actually a good point. This all might be fixable if we just freeze it. Because then I think we can do this, right? And go with... That might be a better way of implementing the safe get color rather than mucking with the dispatcher. Is just freeze the brush. What is your problem? Oh, lovely. The calling thread cannot access because a different thread owns it. This is awesome. Okay. New approach. I think this fixes it. And let's confirm this. Green circle. There we go. Okay. So, the solution then... Yeah, as long as we freeze it before the thread dies... Okay. Okay, so this makes it much easier. The solution then is all of these things that new up brushes should freeze the brushes. Brush dot freeze. I should not new up any brush that I have not frozen. Problem solved. And then we won't hit the other problem either. Okay, so okay, so where I need to find all of my get brush calls in here. I've got too many things in one file. Get brush, get brush, get brush, get brush, get brush, get brush. There's that one. Bar brush. Brush dot freeze. Good suggestion. This will be much simpler because I can guarantee that my thread exists at this point. Let's see. Bar brush. Brush dot freeze. And then I don't really need to write any additional tests in here. The other tests will cover all of those cases. Okay, so let's go back up to here. We don't need this. And then I don't need to update the generator either. Okay, let's check. Get cracking, do your thing. Sure. White space only. Let's see, this is not needed, discard. That is just cleaning up some of the tests. This we want to get rid of, or at least part of it. So I want to discard that line, discard that line, discard that line, discard that line. Oh, but I don't actually want this line either. Edit. Oh, I wish you would remember my spot. I wish you would remember my spot. I don't remember what line I was on. Show me what line number I am. 65. Edit. 65. This guy. Okay. Visual element tests. Go here. Go here. Am I blind or stupid? Oh, it's because I undid. Oh, I see what happened. I was dumb. Let's go here. Here. And then this becomes grid. And then we get rid of this. Like that. Like that. Okay, so close. You're fine. That now looks good. That now looks good. Oh, 146 is the next problem. 146, where I've duplicated up. Yeah, because I don't need that anymore. Okay, should I clean up? Yeah, I kind of hate to do it, but I also kind of really want to, because I've seen it now and I don't like it. And I know I've had other contributions to XAMLTest recently. Nikolai, thank you if you're watching. Which has been great, but it also has meant that some of this stuff where I've got kind of old or garbage code in here means bad patterns get propagated, because before it was just me. It was like, whatever, I'll correct it as I go, but must clean up code. Must clean up code. Okay. So we're gonna just, because all of these things don't need to be this bad. And then hopefully this will be the last of the badness and the world can be a happy place again. Get property. Why is this thing not date picker? I don't understand why this isn't a typed call. I wonder if this one was written pre... Because when I first did XAMLTest, there was no typing. On get property can retrieve null. Yeah, this is just trying to get a selected date. So this should have a get. Oh, is date picker not one that's built up? Let's look. I kind of would have expected date picker to be... these are all just the defaults. Why is visual element... Yeah, so that one's picking it up, but why is element get selected? Oh, there it is. I don't know why. I don't know why I was being weird. Get selected date should be a nullable date time. Should be able to retrieve a null. Okay, good. Okay. It's being weird, or I'm being dumb. Both are possible. Both are very possible. Date picker. Date picker. Let's see, that's fine. Clean that up. Yeah, so get selected date. clean that up. Let's collapse you. See, this is text text block. Let's see, this guy goes here. It is worth noting, if you don't do the type on iVisual element, you will not get all of the fancy extension methods. But that means the name is no longer relevant. I don't think you can do attached properties. Yeah, attached properties, I think you still have to go through the base level one. Interesting. It's interesting. I don't think I can generate these, but I feel like I almost want my generator to generate them. Or maybe I want to do something like element.grid.getRow or something. I'll have to think about that. That might be nice. Let's see. This is visual element text block. This is a newer call. You can just do that. And this is using custom attached properties, so that's good. That's good. This is a text block. Boom. And then we don't need the name. I am wondering if it might be nice to have a set XAML content method that just doesn't take a string. Like, use the generic parameter and build it up. There's no reason to make it harder than it needs to be. That might be a nice addition. It gets a little confusing if the type element isn't one of the built-in types, because then you have to prefix it with a namespace. So that might be... Because implicitly what's happening in this string is it's telling you the namespace. In this case, because it's XAML, because there's no, namespace colon in front of it, you know that it is in the default XML namespace. Yeah, I'm thinking all these date picker ones were probably pre-Kevin introducing typing. And I would like to go through and update the... let's see, set selected date to null. Set selected date null. Boom. I would like to go through and update the source generators that I have in here to incremental source generators. Just because they could be a little bit faster. It's not a big deal, and most of my generators don't need to run that often, but the incremental generators would be a little bit more efficient. Let's see. Set selected date. Boom. Something like that. Make this a little bit nicer. Text block. And screw it, var. And then we don't need the name set on it. Means it probably doesn't need to be multi-lined, which means don't need you. Keep there. Boom. Let's see, that's custom control, which means you will have to retrieve it via some method. Set XAML content. This one is actually retrieving via an interesting means, so we're going to leave it. Because it's not just grabbing the root element, it's grabbing grid and then finding the thing by name inside of it. Same with that one. Same with that one. Let's see, this one appears to be grabbing it by name. We'll do this. Stack panel. This one we can save ourselves at least one call. Make our test just a little bit faster. Remote execute. We'll circle back to this. There's another PR that I was working on. There was a request to add in a method to force validation failures so that you could test the validation templates, which is great. We don't need the name here anymore. My way of implementing it involved extending the remote execution. Okay, so there's that. There's that. Stage, move that down, that's fine. White space only. Underscore is fine. Brush serializer. So that one freeze, freeze, freeze. Okay. Let's see. Fixing, brush, threading, issue. Making sure to always freeze brushes to avoid threading issues when accessing properties on them. Because it really doesn't matter that they're frozen, because it's not like you can mutate them and affect the running app anyway. So we're just going to add that into here. Oh. Side question. What are your hobbies besides WPF and Mountain Dew? Let's see. So most people will laugh at me, but so one of my relaxation activities is actually coding, which is part of how I end up doing all of this. I try to tell my coworkers that when they leave work, that they should go home and do their relaxation activity. People always think that I spend all this time working because I'm coding so much, but it's like, no. When I go home, I fire up my own solutions and I'm building my own stuff, and that's my relaxation activity. I also enjoy riding motorcycles. I will occasionally make jokes about getting hit by a truck. There's a fun story. When I was back at university, one of my professors was teaching us about the truck factor. The idea that you should always evaluate how many people on your team it would take to get hit by a truck before your project would just be tanked and it's dead. And shortly thereafter, I was riding my motorcycle and was involved in a T-bone collision with a Ford F-150, i.e. big truck, and me on a motorcycle. I lost completely. Fortunately for me, there just happened to be a nurse walking by down the street right when it happened and saw the whole thing. She immediately pinned me to the ground and said, "Do not move." And my adrenaline was pumping. I was a little delirious and wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. I'm like, "My leg hurts." And she's like, "Yes, your leg is broken." And I remember thinking, how could she possibly know that my leg is broken? I was wearing all my motorcycle gear, which is fairly thick pants and jacket, helmet, gloves, the whole 9 yards. And I remember thinking, how could she possibly know my leg was broken? It turns out when there's a bend in your leg at a point that is not your knee, it's pretty obvious that your leg is broken. So, yeah, they told me later that they call it a janitor break because no matter who looks at it, even the janitor would have known it was broken. Well, that was exciting. So I will occasionally make jokes about getting hit by a truck, and I still do ride motorcycles. Actually, the exact same motorcycle that I was riding when I got hit by the truck. It started off with the idea of I had to get back on it because at first it was a little bit of pride of I want to make sure that I kind of had to prove to myself that I'm not too scared to get back in the saddle after a big accident, because I was out of commission for a while. Like they had me in the hospital only for I think a week and a half. And then they sent me home, but I was sent home with a broken leg and told not to move. So that, limits your ability to do anything. And then I was in a wheelchair for a bit, then on crutches, and then physical therapy and all the works. But after I was mobile again, it was, no, I have to prove that I'm not too scared to ride this thing again. And so then I started riding, and then I'm like, suck, I still like it. So I kept the bike and keep riding it. Let's see, what else? I used to play a whole bunch of Ultimate Frisbee as well, but that I haven't played as much recently. COVID hit and some of the groups got moved around, and the group that I typically played with moved locations further away from my house, which has made it a little more difficult for me to get out and play. But yeah, oftentimes, and occasional video games. Though I have like 1 or 2 streams where I tried to stream video games, but I realized I cannot play a video game and stream at the same time, or at least not pay attention to the stream. I usually play for me. I tend to usually play single player stuff. My current obsession is Sniper Elite 5, which came out a couple months ago, and I very much love it. I think most people would get bored with my style of play because I tend to go very slow and methodical. I don't remember how many hours I have in on that game. I probably have at least 10 hours in, and I think I'm only on the 3rd level. Again, slow and methodical. Very slow and methodical. Very boring for most people. If I could have one superpower, it would be work to relax. So the bike that I have here, I'll just 2000 SV 650. Actually, that one's pretty close to it. Yeah. This is it. The front fairing and headlight are a little different than mine. This I think was the factory front fairing on it, but this is effectively the same bike that I end up riding. It's technically called a sport touring or standard, I think is one of the words. Any dirt bikes? No. So, okay, more story time. I used to work in a motorcycle shop. It was my very first job. I was affectionately the lot manager, which sounds really cool, except for the real word for the job is gopher. I did all of the jobs that nobody else at the shop wanted to do. So wash windows, take out trash, pull weeds. It's very exciting. Yeah, I was a manager of nothing. Hey, auto merge completed. Okay, we're going to see if the next one passes. While I was there, though, I did not ride motorcycles before working there. Admittedly, I started working there, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're going to get a bike soon." I'm like, "Nah." And then, sure enough, I did. They convinced me. It was all of my coworkers there very much got me into it. A couple of them did take me out riding dirt bikes. There's some ORV parks not too far from where I'm at, so done a bit of. I've ridden dirt bikes, if that counts. Dirt biking and street biking feel very different to me. Dirt bikers are very happy having their back wheel move around. Street bikers, that doesn't happen as much unless you're like trying to do stunts or something weird. I like my back tire to stay behind me and firmly planted on the ground. Dirt bikers are weird. They like to do all kinds of funky stuff, but they also get to have a little bit of fun. So I have done a little trail riding, have done some dunes, ridden a bunch of four-wheelers. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully this guy goes through. Okay, so these other ones here, so there's two things. So this was allowing a means of doing validation. Can you only ride on the back wheel? No, I am not good enough to pull wheelies. I will say, after getting in my accident, I think I ride slightly more risk adverse. Ooh, Jared, I didn't know you ride. We've actually talked about doing like a company ride somewhere at some point, because I think there's about half a dozen people at the office that all ride. At one point in time, one of our coworkers, his profile picture for a long time was him in his motorcycle helmet. They eventually forced him to take a real headshot, because the whole point of the headshots were so that people would recognize you. And if your headshot is you in a motorcycle helmet, it kind of defeats the purpose. It's really hard to recognize you, unless you, of course, show up in the motorcycle helmet. So, So this is a good question. So Nikolai had put through the initial suggestion of how to do the force validation. And so the idea here, and let me just bounce to this branch. Let's see. What was my branch called? I already forgot. Alternative validation approach. Get cracking, come back. Why do I not see it in my list? Oh, these are my local branches. Okay, so it turns out if all you're looking at is your local branches, you don't get to see your remote branches. Who would have thought? Let's pull master, and then we're just going to rebase. So slap you on there. Yeah, I don't doubt there's a conflict. Yeah, great. Okay, so there's that. There's that. We're going to push this because I think the build failure on that side was problematic. So the idea here is, man, I must have something wrong in my settings that I keep getting the line ending issue. Let me jump back here real quick. And let's see, visual element test, line 314. Element test G314. So the idea with this test here is specifically, this came up on the XAML test on one of the PRs. This idea of if I have a binding here, I would like to validate the validation errors that flow through. And so having something that allows you to go through and say set validation error and then retrieve that error back out, and then more importantly clear the validation error, because when you're building up your WPF templates, you can specify how validation errors manifest. The problem is setting them is not necessarily trivial. So so what I ended up doing is this remote execute, and this kind of needs to be flushed out a little bit more, but this guy here previously just looked like this. And all it did, so this is where it gets kind of interesting. So you have a remote execute, but there's this weird, like, for example, set validation error, right? What it wants to do is it wants to retrieve the binding expression and build up this binding and do a bunch of work. But you want this delegate to, or I guess in this case, this local function, you want this local function executed inside of the WPF shell. But the function is written inside of the test project, or in this case, inside of XAMLTest, which is where things start to get a little hairy, because now you need that WPF shell to turn around, call back into your test project DLL, grab this delegate and invoke it, passing in the appropriate parameters. And it gets even more weird when the parameters, like in this case, this error context, need to be passed. So what ends up happening is these parameters get serialized, sent over to the WPF shell. The WPF shell gets a reference back to the test project, pulls the method out, looks at the parameters, deserializes the ones that were sent, and invokes that method inside of the other one via reflection. Kind of ugly, but it works. It works. I contemplated other ways of of making this happen, and I was like, at some point in time, I have a sinking suspicion that I'm going to end up building something similar to how Snoop works. So Snoop, when you go and snoop a WPF app, what it ends up doing is the window that it opens, so for example, Snoop. If I fire up Snoop, right? Okay, where are you? Okay, Snoop. When I let go of this cursor, I am snooping Visual Studio. Okay? And you'll know, so the Snoop windows opens, I'm looking at Visual Studio, we can muck with stuff and whatnot, whatever. But I'll have you note something down on oh, you can't see my taskbar. Okay, but you can see this. My Snoop window is all by itself. The Snoop app, it only has one window associated with it. Whereas this Snoop window itself is associated with my Visual Studio process. So what Snoop ends up doing is invoking and starting a thread inside of the target process, and then instantiating its window inside of that thread. And I contemplated doing something like that. That gets a little crazy. Little crazy. Totally doable, little crazy. Because you then have to deal with all, like, Snoop has to do it in a very generic way, because it doesn't know whether you're running WPF full framework, WPF on Net5, Net Core, etc. So it has, and it doesn't know if it's x64, x86, and depending on all of that stuff, it has all these conditionals on how to do the remote thread start and do the invocation. Like there's APIs to do all of this, but to do it generically is a little more problematic. In my case, I don't need to be as generic because I control both sides of the equation. I control the target process, which is the WPF shell, and the thing calling it, which is the XAML Test library. So I've got both sides, so I can make a few assumptions that Snoop can't make because I own both. But at the end, I figured, I was like, you know what? Reflection's good enough. But I also needed to be able to go through and do things like to get the validation error and pull this thing back, I needed to be able to return values and send things back from the app shell, the WPF shell, back into it. So I went through and built all of this up. So to be clear, the set validation error, clear validation error, and get validation error, all of this stuff, this all works, and the contents of all of these are largely based around the original pull request from Nikolai, because he ran into this problem and he built out a solution, but his solution involved expanding on the protocol buffer, the gRPC spec, and sending the data across that way, which works, totally works. But it means expanding this proto file, and I've been trying to think about ways I could decrease this, especially with my WinUI port and wanting to have the same protocol file for both. I've been trying to narrow the scope and strip out stuff that isn't strip out stuff that's WPF specific so that I can kind of have a common protocol between the two. I don't know if I'm going to get all the way there. I have a strange feeling I'm going to end up having to split this file, which is a little but whatever. It is what it is. I don't want to give up any WPF features, so I based it largely on his implementation inside on there, but where is it? Yeah. So for example, his clear invalid, you'll note, ends up looking, where is it? This is all client side. Where's the other side? Can I collapse it? Let's see, get property type. That's inside of visual element. That goes there, that goes there. Here we are. So get validation error context, do all of the stuff, get all of the things. Mine end up being a little simpler because I don't have to go and look up dependency objects. I already have all of those. Those just get passed straight through. So it makes it a little simpler, but it makes these methods a little simpler in favor of making the, I closed the other PR. In favor of making the remote stuff more complicated. So I'll just show that real quick. Just because. It was an interesting bit of code to write. Invocation. So this is the remote invocation bit. And so it ends up doing a bunch of stuff. And there's a very subtle thing that's happening here. Because of the way I'm doing the invocation, the target method has to be static. And it has to be static because in order to invoke an instance method via reflection, you have to pass it the instance. The problem is the instance would exist inside of the test project, and I would need my WPF shell to to be able to invoke an instance method where it doesn't have access to the instance object, which starts to get really, really weird. And I was like, yeah, ugh. And I could pass things back from the shell into the test project, but then that defeats a lot of the purpose of doing this inside of a shell where I have the full WPF stack. Like, a big portion of why XAMLTest exists is because I wanted to be able to execute code in the context of a full WPF app. Because when you some people will write unit tests over their WPF code, the UI code specifically, and just adjust the thread so that it's an STA thread or similar. The problem is you then have to replicate what the rendering stack would do for you. And I always hated that, because there's plenty of cases where you end up with bugs because it's like, well, that would never happen in a real app, because, you know, the rendering stack's going to call measure and arrange and lay out your object and all of that. It's like, right, you now have to manually do all of that stuff and kind of hope that you match. So this does, I won't bore people with too much of the fun stuff, but it does do all of this thing. The fun thing here, you'll note the way I implemented these methods could have just been private statics sitting outside. Because it's a static local function, it means it's not allowed to capture any variables from the outside. The interesting part here, this is a generic method. Because the one thing that you couldn't do, like if this method were moved to the outside, you'll note, why won't it let me type? Let me type. My backspace and enter keys are both dead. That's exciting. We're going to restart Visual Studio. I don't know why it's doing that, and that makes me unhappy. If you were to take this guy here and bring him out, you'll note the one thing that he can't reference anymore is this T, the generic type variable. And so if, in order to make this guy compile, this would then have to become a T, and specifically a T with the same generic constraint. But when you make it a local function, you still have access to the same generic parameters from up here. But it also means that this method is generic. And yes, Justin Bieber, we ended up doing the exact solution. So specifically in the brush serializer, everywhere where we instantiate the brush, it seemed like the simplest solution was just to freeze it before returning it. And that should fix everything and be perfectly good. Simply because when writing a XAML test, editing the brush doesn't make a lot of sense, because editing the brush won't, you're getting a copy of the brush inside of your test, not the actual instance. So editing it won't actually do anything. So I think freezing actually makes a lot of sense. So great suggestion, by the way. Great suggestion. So I think what is likely going to happen is I want to expand out these remote execute overloads so that there's more of them, because I suspect other people will want to do this kind of thing as well, now that it's more easily accessible. Again, it does get a little weird in that your method and delegate that you pass in must be static. And there's also, I suspect, a failure. I didn't test it, but I suspect there's a failure case if you do these methods inside of a nested class that's generic. I suspect that will also fail. I'm pretty confident. Because right now, all I'm passing is the containing type and any generic parameters on the method, not on the class. So anything inside of a generic class or a nested class, I'm fairly confident will fail. But those were things I decided, I was like, you know what? Those are problems for another day. This at least fixed the immediate problem. And I think will likely deal with my actions problem. So now that all of these things are building appropriately, that makes me feel a heck of a lot better. I love that right, this was my force push afterwards. But at least now, I think things are actually building a little more appropriately. So, but that's where it's at. That's where it's going. I think it's going along smoothly. Materials design project is chugging along. Huge shout out to Nikolai. He has been absolutely crushing it. And I think I have an outstanding pull request from him to go and look at too. I've got 2 outstanding pull requests to go and look at. I am falling behind. Nikolai got added into... So there's a team that I started on here for people who have been doing a lot of contributions to the project, just to give people a little more access. So just to help manage, because I've learned there's a lot more issues and pull requests and management than I can reasonably devote time to do. So anybody who's been a consistent contributor, I've been offering them access into the team, not with any obligation, but just saying, hey, you've been doing great work. Think of this as recognition of that. If you'd like to help manage additional stuff, I want to give you that permission to do so. So if you see people other than me like closing issues, they're probably one of those people on the team. And so all of those guys, big shout out to them. I also plan on putting them listed under every release, because they tend to be closing more issues and opening more pull requests than myself, because there's a lot more of them than me. So, and thank you, Justin Bieber. I thought the remote execute was pretty slick. That it felt to me like it was one of those. The request was to do validation, but I wanted a solution that was very generic. And Nikolai does have a good question down here around figuring out if it's easy to do custom validation rules. So I think I want to write some more tests and build that out. Consider renaming the get set methods a little more indicative. I wasn't very creative when I came up with these names. Yeah, I struggled on figuring out what to name these 2. Naming's hard. Get validation error, dummy. Yeah, effectively, the way the validation ends up working internally is it uses an attached property to force a binding if there isn't one already there. So, naming is the hardest thing we do. Well, it's one of the hardest things we do. Remember, there's only 2 things that are hard: cache invalidation, naming things, and off by 1 errors. And hopefully people laugh, because I repeat the joke constantly. So the more times you repeat a joke, the funnier it gets. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. I think with that, though, I am probably going to call it for the night. I will not see anyone in the morning because I am still on vacation. Darn it. All the way till Monday. So, and I would say I'm going to go have fun, but I think tomorrow morning I'm going to go mow my dad's lawn. So they're gone on vacation, and I noticed it was really long today. So I think I'm going to go take care of it so he can come home to a nice mowed lawn. So it'll be fun. It's been a lot of work. I feel like I work harder when I'm on vacation than when I'm actually at work. Because when I'm at work, I just sit in front of a computer and like move the mouse and go clacky clacky on the keyboard. That's a whole lot easier than mowing lawns and moving dirt. So, and thank you, Jared. So with that, I'll say happy coding. Have a good night. See everyone next week.